Thank you so much. Bonjour les amis, hello friends, Tennessee. I don't want to sound very cliche here, but I'm extremely honored and humbled to be here, gathered with you, to celebrate this country that we all care about, leading up to its 150th anniversary. It's particularly humbling because I'm not a Canadian citizen. But I'm going to ask you, please do not tell the organizers. This is a powerful proof that one may not need to be a Canadian citizen, to have a Canadian passport, to reflect on how Canada's cultural and political life has changed since the Confederation. Instead, one simply needs to be a citizen engaged in her community and impacting Canadian life. Je suis donc ici pour avoir une conversation avec vous et commencer un dialogue. So thanks for each and every one of you for being here. First, I would really like to acknowledge the Treaty 6 land that we all stand on today and give thanks for that. One of the privileges of being a newcomer to a place that is someone who's not endogenous to that place is the possibility to see certain nuances if one looks very closely and to see things very differently than those used to the environment they live in. When my family and I moved to Saskatoon from Niger in 2001, I thought I should really get to know this country that I was going to live in. I wanted to make sense of Canada because I thought if I wanted to belong, I must first understand what Canada was and what made a Canadian. As someone who made sense of the world through stories, I started with the history and literature of Canada. So I got myself a book and a DVD from the school library. Un livre par l'auteure québécoise Arlette Couture, qui s'appelait Les filles de Caleb, et un documentaire.
The Daughters of Caleb, and a documentary on Pierre Elliott Trudeau. Les filles de Caleb is a story taking place in rural Quebec at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century. One of the main characters sees nature for hunting and trapping at the beginning of settlement.
Of the remarkable canoe expeditions Trudeau would go on for existential reflection and learning how he would go on long walks in the snow before making important political decisions, I thought, wow, this is really the man. It was clear to me that human contact with nature and wildlife is central to a notion of Canadian identity. I'm still mystified by how Canadians love such activities as kayaking, canoeing, camping. I mean, where I come from, we try to stay away from nature because it's too hot. When I first arrived at my high school, which had very few students from diverse cultural backgrounds, some were quite excited because they thought that they could finally have a basketball team. What they didn't know is that I have never dribbled before in my life, and I did not know how to play this popular sport invented in Canada. One of my lovely classmates at the time, who was a drummer, also challenged me to do some beatboxing. I had no clue how to do that. All I had was Celine Dion lyrics, being a teenager at the time. Needless to say that he was very, very disappointed. In their minds, a tall African woman like myself must be able to play a sport and be perfectly fluent in a musical style associated with young Black people. After all, that's what they saw on TV. So in my case and in theirs, stories that we knew about each other were the filter of our interactions. Et pour moi, les Canadiens sont très attachés à la terre. After all, when we look at promotional tourist videos about most Canadian provinces, There's always a reference to a vast and varied geographical landscape, and usually it's a pristine lake. Stories are the basis for how we make meaning. We form our identities and distillate other people's identities through the stories we tell ourselves, about others, and about each other. The great Martiniquais writer Aimé Césaire said it best: "I inhabit imaginary ancestors." Nation formation, I believe, is a leap of imagination. Nation building is a story of interconnection. It is and still will be imperfect. It will never be perfect. It is an experience of trial and error. It is fundamentally a continual process of imagination. It is a necessary reimagination rooted in history and a projection in time. It is very necessary that if we hope to improve a nation, that we must reinvent its national histories and stories. For that reason, I believe critical imagination is a condition for nation building. The ability to conceive and work for justice, to relate better with each other, to always seek to create spaces where all live in dignity. The root of critical imagination is openness. So I am here to ask questions, to push our collective ability to be creatively engaged. I was asked by a journalist yesterday, "So do you have any solutions for us?" And I said, well, my purpose is not to give solutions. That is absolutely impossible for me, but rather to ask questions. The most recent popular call for a national reinvention in Canada is I Don't Know More, which has become a global movement that I am proud to say has originated right here in Saskatoon. I Don't Know More is a dare, a resistance to the status quo, to change things as they are. In this complex context, issues of environmental justice, land rights, economic disparities, identity, democratic representation, and much more are raised. A movement is a force of appropriation. As some might say, we are all in this together. Like the brilliant writer Arundhati Roy says, another world is not only possible, she is on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. Let me reiterate, this is not an idealistic and blind wish. This is a profoundly pragmatic question. Canada's well-being as a nation depends on it. Fairness is the hope. Dislocation is the risk. Since and because we are all concerned, I would like to examine a common story we all believe and that we have come to internalize. The story is very embedded as a myth, which is that Canada is a multicultural society. What is meant by this is that Canada sits on its multiculturalist laurels, that Canadian society is proudly tolerant, and that the Canadian state encourages diversity. I'm often told by people I come across in this fantastic land, it's so good to have you here. And I ask, why? They say, well, Canada is so multicultural, hey? We are very different from the American melting pot. I'm therefore told to be grateful to be in this new land, where I could be accepted. The complex of the mosaic, as I call it, which says the ethnic groups can be placed one next to the other as islands, which could constitute Canada. So that you could go to an event and see a Chinese dance, eat East Indian food. Now that is not the question. I mean, I love East Indian food. And visit a mini Irish pub. The point is that the culturalization of the multiculturalist agenda, which I would call it, reduce people to their ethnic groups and to what their cultures could be like or are. What is not asked is who is doing the tolerance? Who is doing the integration? Who can be integrated? What does it take to be integrated, therefore accepted in the public discourse? In what dominant culture integration is being made? For the cultural to become synonymous with difference is a testament for power and exclusion. Who is the different person different from? I'm often asked to co-host the official Canada Day ceremonies in Saskatoon, and I've been very honored to do it in the past 2 years. But I always ask myself and go through an existential crisis every single time. Why am I asked as a newcomer to read the Prime Minister's official message to Canadians on that day? Why isn't there an Aboriginal co-host as well? What does such an absence mean? Jan Martel spoke to us about the empty chair. What story are we here conveying? The layers of identity are diverse. Their meanings are complex. This is 100 years, 150 years that we're going to. The stories are always told from certain points of view, dominant and marginal. The echoing of these stories with each other must create a space for a critical imagination. And this is truly my call for today. Thank you very much.